The wind rolled like a restless ghost across the wide, open plains of Clearwater Valley, carrying with it the scent of dust, hay, and distant rain. The town was small, a single rail line, a few saloons, a blacksmith shop, and a church that leaned slightly against the wind like a weary old man. It was here that Amelia Hayes had lived her entire life, a girl with quiet grace, known for her soft eyes and the way she seemed to belong to the horizon itself. She was the daughter of a proud ranching family, the kind that measured worth in acres and cattle, not in tenderness or dreams. Her world was fenced by duty and expectation, and beyond that fence lived the boy she loved, Cole Turner. Cole wasn't a man of wealth or name. He was a drifter-turned-ranch hand, strong and steady, with a silence that carried meaning. He worked for the Hayes Ranch through hard summers and brutal winters, fixing fences, branding calves, and fighting off the loneliness that always came with open country. And though no one dared speak of it, the bond between Amelia and Cole grew like roots under dry soil, hidden, stubborn, and deep. But love in the Wild West was never simple. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of stolen glances, late night rides under the stars, and promises made in secret. For Amelia's father, a man hardened by pride, it was a scandal that could not stand. The idea of his daughter, the only Hayes girl, loving a man with no land, no bloodline, and no fortune, was something his pride could never bear. That summer, when the valley turned gold beneath the setting sun, everything changed. Amelia's father struck a deal, a political arrangement with the neighboring Dawson family. Their son, Charles Dawson, had been eyeing Amelia for years, seeing her beauty as both a prize and a promise of union between two powerful ranches. And so it was decided, without her voice, without her choice. The night Amelia found out, she didn't cry. She simply stood on the porch as the last light died across the plains, her eyes searching the distance where she knew Cole would be. Somewhere beyond the fence line he was working, unaware that the world they'd built in secret was being torn apart. The next morning she was gone. Her father had made the decision final. She was to leave Clearwater, sent east to live with relatives in Kansas until her arranged marriage could be finalized. The family's word was law, and there was no defying it. The sound of the train whistle that day carved through the town like a funeral bell. Amelia stood on the platform, her hands trembling as the locomotive hissed before her. She looked once more toward the dusty road that led to the Turner Ranch, hoping, praying that somehow Cole would come, that he would fight for her, that he would stop her. But he didn't know. He was out in the northern fields, repairing a fence line. The sky was wide and clear, and he worked without pause, unaware that each strike of the hammer was mocking the last minutes before she would vanish from his life. As the train began to move, Amelia pressed her hand against the glass, watching her town fade away. The ranch, the hills, the place where her heart still lived. The whistle echoed long after the train disappeared into the horizon. Back in Clearwater, when the news reached Cole, the world seemed to stop. He dropped his tools where he stood and rode hard into town, his horse kicking up dirt and stones, but the platform was empty, and the rails stretched into the distance like a scar across the earth. He waited there until night fell, until the lamps flickered out, until all that was left was silence and the sound of the wind. From that night on, Cole Turner was never the same. He became a man shaped by loss, quiet, steady, and unreachable. He took over an abandoned piece of land near the ridge and built a small ranch with his own hands. He worked from dawn till dusk, talking to no one, trusting no one. His life became a rhythm of solitude, horses, dust, and whiskey. The townsfolk spoke of him with a mix of pity and respect. Some said he'd been cursed by love. Others said he'd turned cold as the land itself. Years passed, and Clearwater changed. New folks came, old ones passed on, and the world moved on without her. But for Cole, time stood still. Every morning he would walk to the fence line, look toward the horizon, and wait, though he no longer knew what for. Until one day, everything changed again. It was a late autumn afternoon. The air was crisp, and the town buzzed with the sound of an incoming train. Trains didn't stop often in Clearwater anymore, not unless someone important was arriving or leaving. Cole hadn't been to the station in years, but something, a pull, a memory, a whisper, drew him there that day. As the train slowed and the steam hissed across the platform, the doors opened, and there she was. Amelia Hayes, older now, her face softened by time, but her eyes still carrying that same quiet strength. She stepped onto the platform, the wind catching her hair, her hand clutching a small leather bag. For a moment, Cole couldn't breathe. The years between them vanished like smoke. She had returned, but why? And after all this time, what did she still carry in her heart? The moment their eyes met, the world around them faded, the noise, the dust, the years. It was as though the universe had paused just to let them remember what they had lost. And as she took her first step toward him, the wind whispered through the plains. A new chapter had begun. The return story. She left town forced by her kin. When she stepped off the train years later, his whole world stopped. The autumn sun hung low over Clearwater, painting the dusty horizon with shades of gold and rust. The wind whispered through the wooden slats of the station fence as the train hissed to a stop, releasing clouds of steam that curled into the fading light. For most townsfolk, it was an ordinary afternoon, a brief commotion before the calm of dusk. But for one man standing at the far end of the platform, time had come to a standstill. Cole Turner stood still as stone, his hat brim shadowing his eyes. He wasn't sure what had pulled him there that day. Maybe it was habit, maybe fate, or maybe somewhere deep down he had always been waiting for her. Through the fog of steam she appeared, Amelia Hayes. Years had changed her. Her hair, once the color of sunlight, was darker now, tied neatly beneath a traveling bonnet. Her dress was simple, worn from long roads and harder years, but her eyes, those same steady, searching eyes, were untouched by time. They carried the same quiet sorrow that once tied his heart to hers. For a moment neither moved. The sound of the engine, the murmurs of passengers, the clatter of boots on the platform, all of it faded into the hum of memory. The last time they'd stood on that very spot, she had been leaving. Now she had returned. The townsfolk didn't recognize her at first. It had been nearly a decade since she vanished east. But word spreads fast in small places, and before long, whispers rippled through Clearwater. Amelia Hayes, the daughter of the late Robert Hayes, had come home. Her father's ranch, once one of the largest in the valley, had fallen to ruin after his passing. The Dawsons, the family she had been meant to marry into, had moved north years ago. Whatever plans had once bound her future to theirs had long since crumbled. She arrived alone, with nothing but a worn leather bag and a heart full of ghosts. That evening the town was painted in firelight and long shadows. The saloon buzzed with talk, men guessing why she'd come back, women speculating about the years she'd spent away. Some said she'd married and been widowed. Others said she'd gone east for schooling, but none of them knew the truth. None of them knew the weight she carried, or the face she still saw in every quiet moment. Meanwhile, Cole walked back to his ranch, the world around him blurred by memory. Each step stirred the dust, each breath felt heavier than the last. He had lived years convincing himself she was gone for good. that she had chosen the life her family wanted over the life they could have built. And now she was back, walking the same ground they once dreamed upon. The next morning came with a soft rain, rare for that time of year. Amelia stood by the window of the small inn where she had taken a room, watching the water trace slow paths down the glass. Outside the town woke, shopkeepers opening doors, wagons rattling down the main road, life continuing as if nothing monumental had happened. She had rehearsed this return in her mind countless times, but standing there now, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The past had never really left. It had just waited for her to come home. That day, she walked through Clearwater in silence, her boots leaving faint marks in the damp earth. Every street corner held a memory. The blacksmith's shop, where Cole once worked long hours to save for his own land. The general store, where he used to wait for her on Sunday mornings after church. Even the church itself, weathered, old, and quiet, seemed to echo with whispers of what could have been. By noon, she had made her way to the outskirts, where the land opened wide, and the hills rolled endlessly beneath the sky. And there, beyond the ridge, she saw it, a ranch that hadn't been there before, a single house built of rough, hewn timber, a corral, a stable, and wide open pasture. Cole Turner's place. It looked sturdy, disciplined, and quiet, much like the man himself. She stood at the fence line, her hands gripping the worn wood, the rain still clinging to her coat. From a distance she could see him tending to a horse, his posture steady and deliberate. Even from afar she could tell that the years had carved him deeper, made him leaner, more still. The wind carried the faint sound of hooves, of the creak of a saddle, of a life lived alone. For a long time she didn't move. She simply stood there, letting the past and the present merge like rainwater in the soil, and then, quietly, she turned back toward town. That night the rain stopped, and a calm silence settled over Clearwater. The moon rose pale and distant, watching over the sleeping town. Amelia lay awake, her mind caught between memory and uncertainty. She had not come back for sympathy, nor for redemption. There was something she had to make right, something she had to say, even if the years had stolen their chance at love. At the same time, in the quiet of his ranch house, Cole sat by the fire. The flames danced across his face, revealing the years of solitude, the wear of time, and the ache that never left. He thought of the train, of the face he had seen that afternoon, and of the impossible truth his heart had whispered the moment their eyes met. She had come home. But to what, and why now, after all this time? The world had changed, but the past still lingered like smoke in an empty room. And as the night deepened, both of them, miles apart, yet bound by the same silence, knew that tomorrow their paths would cross again. The past was not done with them. Echoes of the past story, she left town forced by her kin. When she stepped off the train years later, his whole world stopped. The morning sun broke over Clearwater like a promise, soft and golden, spilling across the rooftops and dirt roads, catching on the dew that clung to the grass. For most, it was a morning like any other. But for Cole Turner, it carried the weight of a ghost he never expected to see again. He hadn't slept much since the day she stepped off that train. Her face haunted him just as it had in dreams for all those lonely years. Except now, it wasn't a dream. Amelia Hayes was back, older, perhaps sadder, but as real as the wind that swept across his porch. For years he had convinced himself that she was gone for good, that she had built a life somewhere far away, a husband, a family, maybe even a place that didn't remember Clearwater at all. But seeing her again shattered every wall he'd built to keep her memory buried. The ranch felt different that morning. The air seemed heavier, the silence thicker. He worked harder than usual, driving himself through chores just to drown out his thoughts, repairing a fence post here, tightening a saddle strap there. But no matter what he did, her face followed, the way she had looked standing on the platform, quiet, uncertain, yet still with that same quiet strength she'd always carried. Out in town, whispers had spread fast. The return of Amelia Hayes was the talk of Clearwater. Some called it fate, others misfortune. To many, it was simply curiosity, a woman who had once been the heart of a proud family, now back to find nothing but dust and memory. The Hayes ranch had long been abandoned. Her father's death and debts had swallowed it whole. The land, once alive with cattle and hired hands, now lay quiet and untended, a skeleton of what it once was. The wind that once carried the sound of hooves now only carried silence. That afternoon, Amelia walked the road that led to what was once her home. Each step stirred the dust of her past, every fence post and oak tree a reminder of what she had lost. The porch creaked beneath her boots as she stopped in front of the house. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged slightly. The world she had known was gone. Yet as she stood there, a memory bloomed, faint, fragile, but vivid. The smell of rain after a long drought. The sound of Cole's laughter, rare and quiet. The warmth of a night long ago, when they had sat beneath the stars and dreamed of a life built with their own hands. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the air thick with the scent of earth and time. She had come back to face this, not just the ruins of a ranch, but the ruins of what could have been. As the day stretched into evening, she turned back toward town. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly in the distance, steady, rhythmic, familiar. It was the sound of life still moving forward, even when hearts refused to. Later, as dusk fell, Amelia found herself walking past the small church at the edge of town. The door stood open, a lantern flickering within. The preacher was an old man now, stooped and gray, but his eyes still carried the same gentleness as they had when she was young. He remembered her, the girl who used to sit near the back, her hands folded neatly in her lap, always listening but rarely speaking. She didn't step inside. She just stood at the doorway, watching the flicker of the candlelight, feeling the ache of all that time had stolen. Then she turned away, the hem of her dress brushing the steps as she disappeared into the night. The next morning, fate brought her to Cole's ranch, not by plan, but by necessity. The innkeeper's niece had fallen ill, and Amelia, wanting to earn her keep, had gone to help deliver milk and bread to the ranchers nearby. When she reached the Turner place, she almost turned back, but something inside her urged her forward. Cole saw her before she reached the gate. He stood by the barn, one hand resting on a wooden post, his hat low against the sun. For a long moment, neither moved. The distance between them felt wider than the years that had passed. Amelia set the basket down by the gate and turned to leave, but her glance caught on something unexpected, a small carving on the fence post near where she stood. It was faint, worn by weather, but still visible. 2 initials cut deep into the wood, A.H. plus C.T. The past carved into the land, refusing to fade. She stood there, her breath caught in her throat. He had never erased it, not in all these years. Cole didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence between them carried everything: grief, love, regret, and the echo of promises never kept. The wind rustled the tall grass around them, and for a moment time folded. They were young again, standing beneath a summer sky, believing in forever. But forever had come and gone, and now only the remnants remained. Amelia turned and walked back down the road, her heart pounding. Behind her, Cole stood motionless, watching until she disappeared from sight. The initials on the fence glowed faintly in the afternoon light, a reminder that some things, no matter how long buried, never truly die. That night a storm rolled over Clearwater. The wind howled across the plains, bending trees and rattling windows. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the land in white bursts. In her small room at the inn, Amelia sat by the window, watching the storm. Her reflection stared back at her older, yes, but still carrying the shadow of the girl she had once been. She thought of Cole, of the way he had looked at her without speaking. She thought of the life she might have had if she'd been braver, or if time had been kinder. Across the valley, at the Turner Ranch, Cole sat by his fire, staring into the flames. The storm raged outside, but his mind was far away, back to a time when love had been simple and life had not yet turned to dust. He had spent years trying to forget her, but now that she was back, he realized the truth. He had never stopped waiting. The rain fell harder, and the thunder rolled like the sound of the past returning to claim what it was owed. Somewhere between lightning and silence, both of them, in their separate corners of the world, knew what tomorrow would bring. The storm would pass, but what it left behind would change everything. The storm after the rain story. She left town forced by a kin. When she stepped off the train years later, his whole world stopped. The morning after the storm dawned gray and heavy over Clearwater. The rain had washed the dust from the streets and left the earth soft beneath the hooves of passing horses. The air carried the smell of wet soil and quiet beginnings, but for Cole Turner, it wasn't just another morning. It was the start of something that felt like fate reaching out its hand. The memory of Amelia's face lingered in his mind like a ghost refusing to leave. Her eyes had carried the weight of time, tired, yet fierce, still holding that same depth he remembered from when they were young. The way she had looked at the initials carved into his fence post told him she remembered too. Life at the Turner Ranch carried on, but the rhythm had changed. The workers noticed it before he did. The way his gaze drifted toward the road. The way his pace slowed near the gate. He worked with the same precision, but the fire that had long faded from his eyes had flickered back to life, faint but real. Across town, Amelia had taken a small job at the inn. It wasn't much tending to the kitchen, helping with laundry, serving the travelers who passed through Clearwater on their way west. The pay was small, but it was honest work. She wanted no charity, only a chance to stand on her own 2 feet again. Still, whispers followed her wherever she went. The townsfolk remembered the Hayes family, proud, stubborn, and once wealthy. Her father had been known for his iron temper and strict rules, especially when it came to her. Some said she'd been sent away after shaming the family. Others claimed she'd run off for love. The truth had been buried under the weight of gossip and years. Amelia ignored the talk. She had grown used to the sound of judgment. What hurt her more were the memories. Flashes of laughter in golden fields, stolen glances across the churchyard, and the promise of a life she had been too afraid to fight for. That afternoon, while hanging linens to dry, she heard the rumble of hooves outside the inn. When she looked up, she saw a wagon pulling to a stop. The driver called for help unloading crates of flour and grain, and instinctively she went to assist. The rain had left the path slick, and one crate nearly slipped from the wagon. She caught it just in time, steadying it with her hands. From the shadow of the barn, Cole Turner stepped forward. He had come for supplies, unaware that she would be there. Their eyes met, for only a heartbeat, and the silence between them spoke louder than any words could have. He helped with the crates without a word, his movements slow, deliberate, careful. And when their hands brushed by accident, she felt it, the same electricity, the same warmth she thought had long since faded. But then he turned, lifted his hat slightly, and walked away. No words, no greeting, just a quiet departure that left her standing there, staring after him. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain still echoed in her ears, soft and steady against the window. She thought of the years she had spent away, the city where her uncle had sent her, the endless days of labor, the nights filled with regret. Her kin had forced her to leave, saying she brought shame upon the Hayes name, but they hadn't known the truth, the secret that had driven her into exile. Back then her father had discovered her affection for Cole, a rancher's son, poor but proud. To the Hayeses such love was beneath them. Her father's anger had been swift and merciless. He had sent her east to live with relatives, cutting all ties to Clearwater and forbidding her from ever returning. And so she had gone, her heart breaking, carrying with her the pain of a love denied, but fate, it seemed, had never forgotten. Days passed, and small encounters became frequent. She would see him at the market, or riding past the inn on his horse. Sometimes their eyes would meet, other times he would look away, but she could feel it, that pull between them still alive beneath all the years. Then, one afternoon, as the sun dipped low, the innkeeper's cook fell ill. The mayor was hosting a gathering that evening, and needed a hand to prepare food for the guests. Amelia, known for her skill in the kitchen, was recommended in her place. The request came from none other than Cole Turner himself, who had offered his ranch as the venue for the mayor's dinner. When Amelia learned whose kitchen she was being sent to, her heart stopped. She wanted to refuse, to find any excuse not to go. But something inside her, perhaps courage, perhaps destiny, told her it was time to face what she had run from. That evening she arrived at the Turner Ranch. The kitchen buzzed with activity, women preparing bread, men hauling barrels, the sound of laughter and voices filling the air. She stepped quietly inside, tying her apron, and began to work. The scent of roasted meat and herbs filled the air. The warmth of the oven brushed her face. For a moment she felt almost at peace, as if the years had been a bad dream. Then she heard footsteps behind her, slow, familiar. She didn't turn around, but she didn't have to. She could feel his presence like the heat of a fire too close to touch. Cole stopped in the doorway, his gaze resting on her as she kneaded dough, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. The flickering lantern light caught the edges of her face, the same, yet changed by time and hardship. He didn't speak. He just watched her, every movement a reminder of the life that might have been. For a brief moment, everything else in the world disappeared, the clatter, the chatter, the laughter outside. It was just the two of them, standing on opposite sides of the years. When the dinner was over, and the guests had gone, Amelia stayed behind to clean. The kitchen grew quiet again, the air filled with the scent of ashes and old memories. She gathered her things and stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool, the stars sharp and clear against the black sky. Across the yard, Cole stood by the corral, his silhouette outlined against the lantern light. He looked up when she stepped outside. Their eyes met one last time before she turned and walked down the path toward town. Neither spoke, but both knew something had shifted. The past was no longer buried. It was awake, alive, waiting. And though neither could say it aloud, they both understood the storm had not ended. It had only just begun. The weight of what was lost story. She left town forced by her kin. When she stepped off the train years later, his whole world stopped. The dawn broke over Clearwater in shades of pale gold and muted gray. The air was cool, the world still waking, and yet Cole Turner had not slept. He had spent the night wandering between the stables and the porch, haunted by the echoes of what he'd seen the night before. Amelia, standing in his kitchen, her hands moving gracefully over bread dough, as if she'd always belonged there. The memory refused to fade. The way the lamplight had softened her face, the way her hair had fallen loose around her shoulders, it all brought back the girl he had loved long ago, before the world had taken her from him. But she wasn't that girl anymore. There was a quiet sadness in her now, something carved by years and pain. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and stood by the window, staring out over the hills. The ranch was waking, men calling to the horses, roosters crowing in the distance. Yet for all the life around him, Cole felt the weight of emptiness pressing down harder than ever before. Across town, Amelia was awake as well. She sat by the small window of her rented room at the inn, the early light spilling over her face. Her thoughts were a storm she couldn't quiet. Every moment at the Turner ranch had felt like a dream she wasn't meant to touch, one she'd already lost once. She thought of the years she had spent away, the cities that had never felt like home, the cold faces of relatives who had looked upon her with pity and judgment. They had sent her away to learn propriety, but what they had really meant was to erase the shame of her heart. Her kin had made her believe she'd done wrong by loving Cole. They'd told her he was beneath her, that his hands were too rough, his life too simple. And when she had refused to let go, her father's fury had sealed her fate. She had been sent away under threat of ruin, forced to leave without even a goodbye. All those years she had told herself that time would bury the pain, but standing in Cole's kitchen the night before had shattered that lie. The feeling was still there, buried, but breathing. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the ache of something she had once thought gone. Later that morning she walked through town on her way to the general store. The streets were busier now that the harvest season was near. Farmers and traders gathered, wagons lined the road, and children played near the watering trough. She kept her head low, though she could feel the stares that followed her. Everyone in Clearwater had a story about her return. Some said she'd come back a widow. Others whispered that she'd lost everything in the city and had nowhere else to go. The truth was simpler, but harder to tell. She'd come back because her heart wouldn't let her stay away. As she walked, she passed the churchyard where the old oak stood, the same one where she and Cole had carved their initials years ago. The letters were still faintly visible, weathered by time. She stopped, brushing her fingers over them, and for a moment she felt 16 again. A gust of wind rustled the grass, and a single yellow leaf fell at her feet. It was enough to make her turn away quickly, her throat tightening with the memory of promises never kept. Meanwhile, back at the Turner ranch, Cole was trying to lose himself in work. The ranch hands were rounding cattle near the creek, and he joined them, pushing his horse harder than usual. The sweat, the dust, the strain, it all helped to drown the noise in his head. But no matter how far he rode, he couldn't outrun the image of her. That evening, when he returned to town for supplies, fate intervened once again. The sky was turning copper as he reached the inn. He was about to walk past when he heard commotion from inside, the sound of a glass shattering, a man's harsh voice, and then silence. Cole stepped through the door, his eyes narrowing. The saloon keeper's son, half drunk and stumbling, had cornered Amelia by the counter. She stood still, refusing to meet his gaze, her face pale but composed. Cole's presence in the doorway was enough to silence the room. The drunk muttered an apology and slunk away, and for a moment only the sound of rain outside filled the space. Amelia didn't look at him. She simply gathered the broken glass and walked to the back, but Cole saw the tremor in her hands. He wanted to say something, to reach out, but he didn't. Instead, he left quietly, his boots echoing on the wet porch. The rain fell harder now, the world blurring around him. That night, the rain turned into a storm that swept across Clearwater. The wind howled through the streets, rattling shutters and lifting dust from the earth. Amelia stayed up late, watching through her window as lightning streaked the sky. She thought of Cole, of the man he had become, the loneliness she could see in his eyes, the distance that time had built between them. In the quiet of her room, she let herself cry for the first time in years. The next morning, she was gone from the inn. No one knew where she had gone, only that she had left at dawn, walking north out of town toward the hills. The innkeeper said she had packed her small bag and paid her dues before disappearing down the road. When word reached Cole later that day, something in him snapped. He dropped what he was doing and rode hard out of town, following the road north. The rain had left the path muddy, and the trail was faint, but he followed it anyway. He didn't know what he would say if he found her. He only knew he had to. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, he finally saw her, a small figure walking along the ridge, her skirt whipping in the wind. She had stopped near the overlook, where the land fell away into the valley below. Cole slowed his horse, watching her from a distance. The setting sun framed her in gold, and for a moment he thought she looked like a vision from another time. He dismounted and took a step forward, his boots sinking into the wet earth, but then he stopped. Something in her stance told him she wasn't just wandering. She was leaving again for good this time. The wind tore through the grass, carrying the faint echo of the train whistle in the distance, the same sound that had once taken her away. Cole stood there, frozen between the past and the present, as the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, slowly, Amelia turned, her eyes meeting his across the wind and distance. In that single look, everything unsaid between them was laid bare, the pain, the loss, the love that had never truly died. But neither moved, neither spoke. The sun sank lower and the light faded. The moment hung suspended, fragile and uncertain. And just as the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky, she turned away. Cole stood there long after she was gone, the wind whispering through the grass around him, carrying with it the ghost of what could have been. The last train home story, she left town forced by her kin. When she stepped off the train years later, his whole world stopped. The next morning dawned cold and quiet over Clearwater. The rain had passed, leaving behind a silver mist that clung to the hills and crept between the trees. The land was washed clean, yet everything felt heavier, as if the storm had taken something with it, something that couldn't be brought back. Cole Turner stood by the fence, overlooking the valley, his hat pulled low, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The events of the night before played through his mind in an endless loop. Amelia standing on the ridge, the wind tearing through her dress, the fading light catching her hair. The way she had turned, met his gaze, and then simply walked away. He hadn't followed her after that. He couldn't. There had been something final in her step, something that told him no words would have changed her mind. But sleep had not come to him since. The night had dragged on endlessly, filled with thoughts of what he had lost, and what might still be slipping away. Down in town, the train whistle echoed through the valley again, shrill and distant. It was the morning departure, heading east toward the same world that had once stolen Amelia away. Cole's chest tightened as he listened. He knew somehow, deep down, that she would be on it. He didn't waste another minute. Throwing his saddle onto his horse, he rode hard down the slope, mud flying beneath hooves, the cold morning air biting at his face. The streets of Clearwater were barely awake as he thundered through, a few shopkeepers lifting their heads, startled as he passed. The train station loomed ahead, smoke already curling into the pale sky. The platform buzzed softly with travelers, and among them there she was. Amelia. She stood near the far end, her small bag clutched in one hand, her hat pulled low to hide her face. Her posture was calm, but there was a stillness about her that spoke of resignation. The years had taught her how to carry pain quietly. The train hissed and rumbled, iron wheels grinding against the tracks. The steam rose in clouds, wrapping her in white for a moment, and for a heartbeat she vanished behind it. Cole's boots hit the ground before his horse had even stopped. He ran through the crowd, through the hiss of steam and the murmur of voices. And then, through the veil of smoke, he saw her again. She turned, as if sensing him before she saw him, her eyes lifting slowly. For a moment everything stopped: the crowd, the train, the sound of the world itself. There was only the look between them. It wasn't the fiery gaze of young love anymore, but something deeper, something carved by time and loss, and the aching years that had stood between them. In that look there was forgiveness, there was understanding. Amelia's hand trembled as she adjusted her grip on the small bag. She glanced toward the train door, then back to him, and though neither spoke a word, the truth hung between them as clear as the morning air. She hadn't come back to stay. She had come back to say good-bye properly this time. The whistle blew again, sharp and final. The conductor called out for passengers to board. Around them, people moved, voices rose, and the steam thickened. But the two of them stood still in the midst of it all. Cole took a slow step forward. Amelia didn't move away. Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years he saw the girl she had been, the one who used to meet him by the river at sunset, who laughed with her whole heart, who had loved him without fear. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. She held it out, her hand steady now, though her eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. Cole took it. His rough fingers brushed against hers, and in that single touch, the years between them seemed to dissolve. Then, without another moment's hesitation, she turned and stepped onto the train. The door closed behind her. The whistle blew again, longer this time. The train lurched, gears turning, wheels screeching as it began to move. The platform filled with motion, people waving, voices calling, steam rising in thick waves that blurred everything into a white haze. Cole stood where he was, the paper clutched in his hand, watching as the train carried her away once more. It was slower this time, almost reluctant, as if the very iron beast knew the weight of the moment it was breaking apart. When it finally vanished beyond the bend, the silence that followed was unbearable, the kind that settled deep in a man's chest and didn't leave. Cole unfolded the paper with hands that shook slightly. Inside, written in Amelia's careful hand, were just a few words. They were words of peace, of love that had never truly died, of regret for the years they had lost, and of gratitude for what they had once shared. She told him she had been forced to leave all those years ago, and that the pain of it had never faded, that she had returned not for redemption but for closure, to face the ghost of her own heart. And in the final line she wrote that she hoped he would not remember her with sorrow, but with kindness, as someone who had once loved him enough to let him go. Cole folded the letter carefully, his thumb brushing over the creases. He slipped it into his jacket and walked slowly back through the quiet streets. The town moved on around him, unaware that something sacred had just passed between two souls who had once belonged to each other. That afternoon the clouds broke and the sun poured down warm and golden. Cole returned to his ranch, the air alive with the scent of wet grass and earth. He moved through the fields, the rhythm of work grounding him, steadying the ache that lingered. In the weeks that followed, he found himself thinking of her often, not with the sharp pain of longing, but with a quiet peace. He read her letter many times until he had memorized every word. Life on the ranch returned to its steady pace. The cattle grazed, the rivers flowed, and the wind whispered through the canyons. Yet somehow everything felt different now, softer, clearer. He realized that love, real love, doesn't always end the way one hopes. Sometimes it leaves, sometimes it returns, and sometimes it simply changes form, but it never truly dies. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, Cole stood on his porch, gazing out across the valley. The world stretched wide before him, the same as it always had, yet now it felt full again. Somewhere out there, a train whistle echoed faintly in the distance. And Cole smiled, not because she was gone, but because she had lived once in his world, and that was enough.